Any questions on the lab? Everything clear? Did everything work? Nice. Okay, so in the last lesson, we finally started to see what Bootstrap was. We basically said that it is a library, a CSS built by someone else that solves many of the common problems or the common issues that we face when we try to design a layout and to implement a web layout, okay? So we saw that the Bootstrap basically works as a flex with a flex display. It is basically a grid system and it's super useful because it implements the responsiveness. No? So by using the classes that Bootstrap gives us, we are very easily able to implement all of the responsiveness of the website. So we saw that first of all, Bootstrap offers us the grid system. Then it has predefined components. Then it has utilities and icons. And in the website, we can also find the examples. Today, we will pay special attention to the grid system. So we will start to replicate the layout using Bootstrap, but mainly paying attention to the grid system. And if we have time, we will try to use the components that they give us to create the things within the containers of the website. Okay, it basically works as we have already seen that Flexbox works. So it has concepts that we are already familiar with, such as the columns, such as the rows, and that's all. We said that the containers are the most basic layout element to use the grid system that Bootstrap provides to us. So we always start with the container, and within the container we create the rows, and within the rows we create the columns. Okay. So it basically will work like this. We will first declare the container. Within the container we declare the rows, and within the rows the columns. Okay. Why does Bootstrap works with a 12-column system? Yeah, because 12 is a nice number because it enables us to divide. It can be divided by 1, by 2, by 3, 4, by 6, and by itself, by 12. Okay, so if we are trying to think how to compose a layout, we have many options of layout by dividing the columns, okay, or assigning different values to the columns. So as you can see here, for instance, we can create a layout with 6 columns, each one occupying two columns. We can have a layout of 3 columns or 4 or 5, and so on. Okay. What is this? It's basically what we have done so far with the media queries, no? So just that the Bootstrap gives us like a predefined set of breakpoints, they call breakpoints, but basically are the measures until which a given media query or a given layout or responsive layout works, okay? But this is the implementation that Bootstrap has of the media queries that we have worked so far. So by default, they have 6 default breakpoints, and we will see how to use them. Indeed, last time we saw how this class infix worked. So how does it work? We basically apply it to the class, meaning that if a specific class has SM, says or stands for the fact that it will behave in that way when the size is the small one. Okay. Today, of course, we will see that in practice, and it will make more sense. But just to conceptually make it clear, for instance, we say that this column will behave as an 8 column when it is from medium up to large. Okay. Okay, then we will see the website. We also see the icons. So far, questions? Everything clear? Okay, this is just a review of what we saw the last week. And then finally, we will see today it in practice. So it has like 3 basic steps to use Bootstrap. The first one is to import the Bootstrap CSS. How do we import the Bootstrap CSS? The same as we have import our own CSS so far, no? Here there is a difference, no? Because when we import our CSS, we have them in the computer, no? So the file is next to the HTML. In this case, where is the CSS? In a remote location, in the Bootstrap server. So if you take a look at this link here, element, you can see that the href is not anymore to a local file, as it was in our case, that it was mystyles.css, but it is to the website where the CSS is hosted. Okay, but apart from that, nothing changes. So let's try to start with that and let's see how it goes, okay? So I will create the, of course, if you have the computer, you are welcome to try to use this. Indeed, I will. Indeed, I copy-pasted what we had last week, so we can work on the file that we had last week, okay? So here we are in the head, and we want to import Bootstrap, no? What is the exact link that we need to use? You can find it here in the official Bootstrap website. So this is the Bootstrap website, okay? Well, the address is getbootstrap.com, and then here, when you go to the Get Started with Bootstrap, you have 2 options. The first one is installing using a package manager. That is the one that we won't use because it's more difficult and more complex. And the simple one, that is basically to import the file that is hosted in a remote server, okay? So we'll use this one, and we copy this line that, as you see, is nothing very different from what we have seen so far. So we copy this line and we paste the line here, okay? So here we still have our CSS, and here we have the Bootstrap CSS, okay? Let me delete this font that we have imported because I want to show you something with the fonts of Bootstrap. So up to now, we will leave just these 2 files. And here, I won't use anymore this font. Okay, so far so good, no? We have imported the Bootstrap, but we are not using any Bootstrap class, and our page still looks the same, okay? And it is applying just our style, the one that we defined last time, and everything is under control, okay? Indeed, let me show you something. If I delete Bootstrap in this moment, what happened with the font? It gets back to the default font that we had before using Google Fonts. Do you remember? What does it mean? That Bootstrap by default has its own font, okay? We can customize that font. We can use any font we want, but I just wanted to show you that Bootstrap has its own font. So that's why now the font looks like this. Okay. Let me Okay, now I was thinking if I wanted to start working from this or start from scratch, but I think it's more clear if we start from scratch, and if we get lost, we can still copy paste what we had in the previous file, okay? So here we have the body, and so far we haven't done anything. There is anything on the website, okay? So let's get back to the slides. So the first step that was importing Bootstrap is as easy as copying and pasting the CSS, the Bootstrap CSS into the head. Then there are some metadata that we have to add into the head to make the responsiveness work. Specifically two items. The one of them is to set specifically what will be the width. That in this case, we will say that the width will be the device width, okay? So we will set a specific device width, and we will say that the initial scale, or the scale in which the element will be displayed, is the initial scale equal to 1, okay? This is basically a copy-paste too. It's something that Bootstrap needs to know how to proceed with the responsiveness, how to set the elements on the layout, and well, this is a copy paste basically. Okay, and as you have seen, still nothing. We don't have any content, but we have just imported CSS and we have set these values for the metadata. The third step is always to start with the div class container, okay? Which is not very different from what we have done so far, because if you remember, the first class that we had, or our biggest container, that had a class that we defined ourselves, that was myGridContainer, okay? Why did we have that class myGridContainer? Because within that specific class, we would arrange all the elements that we want to behave as a grid, okay? So in this case, as before, the first thing is to use this class container. What's the difference? That this class is not defined by us. It doesn't belong to us. It is a class that has been defined by Bootstrap that we can use at this point in our layout. Within the container, we will use the row, and within the row, we will use the columns, okay? Let's see it in practice. So Okay, what can we infer from this very basic sketch? How is it working? Well, it is creating a row and it is creating 3 columns, each one occupying how much? How much space do they occupy? 4. Because in this case we have 3 columns and it is always a 12 grid, so if it has 3 columns, we can infer that each one of them will have 4 columns, will occupy 4 columns. How do we change that? If instead of call, so what happened here? The first one is occupying just 1 column and the other ones will be occupying 5 and 6, something like that. Indeed, it should be better something like this, no? If we make the first one to occupy 2, so that we know that the other ones will be occupying 5, okay? So the important thing here is that when you do something like this, you always have in mind that the sum will be always 12, okay? Does it make sense? Nice. Okay, so getting back here, how do we add the responsiveness to the website? Basically, by using this infix into the class, okay? So if we don't want to add any responsiveness, then we just declare the column as we have done so far with the call 6. But if we want it to behave differently depending on the viewport side, we just add the infix before the number. So let's do the example with MD. So how do we, okay, first of all, very important. Here in the Visual Studio Code preview, it doesn't work the responsiveness, okay? So as you can see here, it doesn't work from here. So what do we have to do? Let me show you. Here, when you are in Visual Studio Code, you will see this button there that is Go Live. So if you click on Go Live, it basically builds like a local server, and the website is then run into the browser, okay? And then in the browser you can play with the width, okay? There is also another way to play with the width and with the Let me check this. Okay. Okay, in Safari it doesn't have that, or it maybe has, no, for sure it has it, but it's hidden. But here it's easier because you go here to view, and then you have like developers options, okay? And then you open like the inspector of Chrome. And here you can see that it has like this icon, this small icon. Can you see this one? And then by clicking on that icon, it lets you to play like with different dimensions of the devices that would be typically be used to open a website. So for instance, it has like a predefined set of devices that you can use to experiment. So how would my website look on an iPad Air, for instance? And then it sets like the specific, like the particular width for such device, okay? So this is an easy way to test the site. Okay, so right now our website is looking like this. Why it is behaving like this? And this is the code. If we remove this one, it will behave like this, each one occupying 4 columns. So what's the meaning of this class? How can we read or understand that class? Indeed, let's take a look. When the website becomes smaller, what happens? It occupies the 4 columns, each one. So how do we, what's the meaning of this call MD6?
Apply the style whenever the dimension is smaller than the present.
So whenever the dimension is smaller than 6, than MD, how does that column behaves? It occupies. When is it smaller or bigger than the MD? Because when it's bigger, for instance, here, it occupies 6, no? But then when it gets smaller, it occupies 4, okay? So we read this as when the dimension is bigger than MD, then it will occupy 6. Let me check something. Yep. So for instance, here we are saying when the column is bigger than small, it will occupy 6, okay? When it is bigger than MD, it will occupy 6. Otherwise, it will occupy 4, okay? Yep.
Why, whenever you restrict the window, the column scatters?
The columns?
Scatters, alloy.
What do you mean? This space? Because it depends. Do you remember that we had container? And what's the difference between container and the, well, let me show you this one. Good question. we had these two kinds of container. So one of them is one that centers the content in the middle and lets space on the sides. And the other one is one that tries to occupy the whole screen, okay? So up to now we are using the first one. But if instead of the first one, we set this to container fluid, you will see that it now occupies the whole space. It doesn't let any space on the sides. Which one do we like more? The first one or the second? I think maybe the first one can be more safe because you leave some space on the sides so that if the screen is not as big as you would expect, or then you have the space on the sides. And I think most of the sites try to okay, for instance, in this case, they set this container with a fluid layout, so it is occupying like the whole width. But then, for instance, below, you can see that this one is a different container that is not occupying the whole screen, but it is occupying just like the middle portion of the screen. So we can infer that this one would behave, if they use Bootstrap, for sure they would be using the container class, okay? Is it clear how this works? This responsiveness and these classes that enables us to deal with the responsiveness? Yeah.
In this case, if we put call m6, is call md6 useless?
No, it is not useless, but it applies one specific rule at a time, depending on the device viewport. No?
But call m6 it means for the...
No, because this one is, for instance, from small up to medium. We want it to behave occupying 6. But let's say that, for instance, here we don't want it to occupy 6, but 8. So basically we're saying for each scale, or each time that the size of the window is scaled, I want this column to behave in this way. No? So from small up to MD, I want it to behave as a 6 column. Then from MD up to the biggest screen, I want it to behave like an 8 column.
The biggest or the bigger?
Up to the
Up to XL or
up to XL. Yeah. So by default, it is column 4. Then when it goes after the SM, it becomes a 6. And then when it exceeds the MD, it becomes 8. Okay? Is that clear how it works? Is this easier from what you, compared to what you did in the lab? It's much more easier, no? Because now we don't have to go to the CSS and declare all of the media queries. Do you remember how we implemented this so far? That last week we had to do this, and then to override for each specific width each component and say how each component override the rules so that it behaves differently depending on the size. So now it's just applying or using the class, and we are done. Okay? Question, and this is an important question. can we still use our custom CSS? Or since we are using Bootstrap, we forget about our CSS? No, we still can use our CSS, and we can customize what Bootstrap gives us with our own CSS. So for instance here, let's say, okay, so this, for instance, is a class that I define in my own CSS, and I can still apply my own CSS rules to the elements that have been also formatted with Bootstrap classes. Okay, so all of these classes are being applied. The first one, or the ones with the column, belong to Bootstrap, and the last one belongs or concerns to something that I have done in my CSS file. Okay, so it is not that if we use Bootstrap we can't use any other CSS, but we can use both of them. Is it clear? Okay. Okay, so since this is clear, let's try to do something, and let's try to translate what we built last time without using Bootstrap, just using our CSS, and now let's try to use Bootstrap. But mainly, for now, we won't pay so much attention to the visual appearance, but we will pay attention to the responsiveness. That up so far is like the biggest gap or the biggest advantage of using Bootstrap, no? So we will try to replicate the same layout, but paying attention to how it behaves with different viewports, okay, or with different screens. So this one indeed, let's change these ones. The one in the left is the one that we did last week, and the one in the right is the one we're trying to create right now using Bootstrap, okay? So here, as I show you, both of them have like the container. Just in our case, it was a container defined by us. Now it is the container defined by them. Now we are going to create a first row, because we know that after the container it comes a row. Okay. What is this row for? Indeed, first of all, how are we going to face this with Bootstrap? I would say that each one of these, this one would be the first row. Okay, so a row for the header. Then we could say that the navigation bar, or this one, would be another row. Do we agree? Then we will have this, that is like the main content, will be another row, And finally, we'll have the footer, okay? So up to now, we need to create 4 rows. Do we all agree with this idea? Okay. So the first one will be the header. So since we know that this container will represent as the header, instead of calling this div, we might call it Then we had the navigation, no? Okay, so the second one is the nav. And just to have a clue of where they are, we will write, okay, so this is basically how it works, no? Why does it show in that way? Because it has 4 rows, but all of them don't have anything, so indeed. Indeed, this is what we have up so far. Okay. Okay, it is super simple. It doesn't have anything super fancy. Now that we have this, let's try to think, how do we want to look? Indeed, let's add something to the header, for instance. So if here we have the row, which one is the next element to add, or the next class to use? The column, no? That will be the column within that row. So So how it is behaving? Well, like a column, like a row. The first one, this first one is a row with 2 columns. Okay. now let's make some stupid example here, but last time we were saying we want that if our screen gets very small, the links or the sign in won't be here anymore, but we want it to go down, okay? And for instance, last week we were able to implement that by using, okay, we were able to implement that by using the media queries, no? So that the links are originally here, but when the screen gets smaller, they get down. They go down and they occupy the whole screen, okay? So how do we implement this here? Are you trying that on your computer? Someone in the computer, try and let me know how. Yeah. Which one? Which classes would you use? Okay, let's try. Call SM12. And the same in the other one? So what happens in this case? If we set it to call SM12, it will occupy like the whole with the big screen, okay? And yeah, but let's try call SM6. Let's see what happens if we set this to call SM6. So it works that with the big screen, it occupies each one 6, no? If we set it to a small one, then it occupies 12, the whole screen, no? So up to here, it works perfectly, and then when it gets smaller, each one will occupy like the whole available width, okay? Why? Because by default, we haven't declared any other value like for that column, so it occupies the whole screen, the whole screen available in there, okay? So this one would make the trick. Let's say that, for instance, we want that if we open, okay, in the big screen, both of them will occupy 6 and 6. Now let's think that if we, no, indeed, in the big screen, we want one of them to occupy 2 and the other one to occupy 10, for instance. And then if we go to an iPad, let's try to make it occupy like 6 and 6, okay? So let's try to create like those 3 variants of the. So how do we create that layout? So what did I say here? From MD to, starting from MD up to the biggest possible screen size, I want the links to occupy 9 columns, and I want the logo to occupy 3 columns, okay? So if I go then to the website, it should look like this. This one is occupying 3, this one is occupying 9, okay? If I get a smaller size, smaller than MD, how it behaves? it will apply immediately this rule, no? Because this rule is from when I have from a small screen up to the biggest one. So from the small, when I exceed the small one, it will occupy each one 6. When I exceed the medium one, the links will occupy 9 and the logo will occupy 3, okay? So basically the way that we define the classes are always thinking from when that breakpoint is exceeded, how many columns do I want it to occupy, okay? It's clear the way that we read like the responsiveness and how we set the classes column numbers? Perfect. Then well, I don't know which I want to. Yeah.
We need the whole segment before the whole MD3 or it just exists?
This one? Yeah, you have to set that specific.
Before column D.
Yeah.
We need column D9.
No, not necessarily, because here, okay, we can write this call. Okay, yeah, I'm sorry, yeah. In this case, it is necessary because otherwise you don't specify this being a column until it doesn't reach a given point. So that was why it occupied like the whole column, because it placed one element below the other one. So yeah, in this case, it's necessary. Sorry. But the only problem with this is that when you set the column, just the call, okay, of course it's not just call, but call whatever. So you have to specify a specific value, for instance, call 6. Okay. Questions? Is it clear? Okay. Is it clear the difference from doing it from scratch manually than using Bootstrap? Okay. Yeah.
Now that we would call call 6, for example, when the screen is smaller, it doesn't go.
It doesn't go down. Yeah, it doesn't go down, but it stays here, because the default behavior without specifying the column was that that container didn't behave as a column, so it was a block that basically was placed down, no? So we have both of them. But here, since I specified this default column value, then it will occupy just the half. If, for instance, here we set 12, okay, I know what you're saying. But here, if I set 12, then it will go down, yeah. It will do the trick, yeah?
And how do we implement, for example, if we wanted center in parallel?
If we want?
If you wanted just a row, single row with just in parallel center.
Okay, okay, if you, for instance, want this imparato in the middle, there are other classes for that. We will go to that. Right now, the classes that I'm showing are just basically 3: the container, the row, and the columns. Just because I want you to show how to implement the responsiveness in the website just by using those 3 classes. So my advice is also, when you will get to work with Bootstrap, first of all, think just of the layout and make the layout work responsiveness, okay? That is basically the same that we did with our exercise last week. We first thought of the layout, and then when the layout was fine, we started to work on each specific component, on the header, on the navbar, and on the footer, and everything else. So first of all, let's try to make it work just with the responsiveness, and then we get into the components. Here, I will stop here with the responsiveness, because since we don't have any content, it's kind of I mean, we can't see how they visualize. So let's try to add some content to the site, and based on that content, let's see how it goes. So do you remember that I told you that Bootstrap had four components? One of them was the grid system. The other one was the user interface component that were already prepared by them and that we can use in our website. So up to now, we have just used the grid. But if we come here to the documents, to the website, we can see okay, let me just quickly show what you will find here. Here is like the documentation to get started with Bootstrap, the first link. It's basically what we have done so far and the instructions to make it work in the website. Then it has some specifications on how Bootstrap can be customized. We will get to them later, but up to now, we're basically working on the layout. That was what we have seen so far. It has like the breakpoints. That was what I explained. Then it has the description of the available containers, that as we have seen is the container and the container fluid. Then it has the explanation on the grid system, that it has 12 columns. And it shows basically how we can deal with the columns and with the responsiveness. It shows us, for instance, how within a container we can center or align them vertically, horizontally. And as you can see here in the examples, everything works with classes that have been defined within Bootstrap. Okay? So if I want, for instance, to achieve this kind of layout or this kind of example, what should I do? Basically copy-paste this snippet. Okay? And it will automatically work. Why does it work? Because they are classes that belong to Bootstrap, and I have already imported Bootstrap in my website. Okay? Okay. Then it has information concerning the typography, the images, how it works with the tables, and how it works with the figures. Then it has forms. That is something we haven't seen so far. And the other thing that we can use are these components. What are these components? Graphical interface components that we can immediately copy-paste and use in our website. So for instance, here we are thinking of a navigation bar, right? We are needing to implement a navigation bar in our website. So here you can find navbar and examples of how the navbars are built in Bootstrap. So let's take a look, for instance, at this one. If we want this navigation bar in our website, more or less we copy paste and see how it behaves. I say more or less because sometimes, I mean, you can copy paste the code, but then you have to reason on the code and how it works and why it works in the example. Okay? So it is not just copy paste and it should immediately work, but you have to reason somehow how the code that you have copied would work in our layout. Okay? So, well, let's try a simple one, because usually when you get like the most difficult ones, you can make some trouble, because you have to understand that, for instance, here they are behaving with these links as if they were in a list, and that list has a class that is drop-down menu. So let's start with a easy one, and let's see how it behaves. So for instance, this one. So what did I do? I copy-pasted this code, and then in my own HTML, I come here and try to figure out what was the space that within my layout I have allocated for the navigation bar, okay? So it was this one. So instead of the H6, let's try to copy paste this one, and let's see how it works, if it works. Okay, yeah, super simple, but it works, no? Because now you can see that it has like a different background, and it has like the title on the side that was navbar with a specific, or similar to the example that we have seen here, no? So it is basically this one. Important, or let's try to make sense of what we find here. In this snippet, what do you understand, or how do you can interpret that specific snippet? It is a snippet corresponding to something that in the website should be the navigation bar. How do we know that? Because it has the nav, okay? It applies a class to that navigation bar. It applies navbar and then BG body tertiary. We don't know what this means. If we want to get an understanding of what this means, we can copy paste and search in the documentation to see how that specific style behaves and what it represents. Within that navigation bar, what does he do? It creates a container, okay? And within the container, what does he do? He creates a link. This A is a link. Independently from the class that it uses, we all know that an A represents a link. Here, it applies a class that makes that link to look in a certain way. In this case, it's to make it work like as an image, or to give the appearance of an image. Okay, so it's nav brand, and it probably is a class that will set the link to this specific position and set it on, paste it or stick to the left or something like that, and boom, that's all. And then it has the image, no? So it has the image with a specific width and with a specific height. So that was what I'm trying to say before. When you are going to use something for Bootstrap, it is not just copy-pasting what you find in Bootstrap, but it's also trying to make sense of what is implemented there, how it works, and then what's the best way to integrate that into the HTML. So for instance, let's try to use this one and see how it works. So instead of the one that I used before, I will try to use this one. Okay, and why it doesn't work? Because I, of course, don't have that image that they are referencing here. So instead of here, I can paste and I just pasted like the image with a specific, just specifying one, just the width or just the height, so that it scales with the image. Because if I set both values, the image might distort, no? So I just specify one, and the other one automatically scales accordingly. So for instance, by using that class, I could add this well, this navigation bar with this element at the left. Okay. Are you trying that on the computer? Does it work? Okay. Okay, there was something, for instance, in our website, we wanted to have two links, no? One of them to register the user and the other one to sign up or to log in the user. So let's try to see which navigation bar, more or less, it's similar to ours, okay? So in this case, for instance, we have this one. And once again, it is not just copy-pasting everything. It's try to make sense of what is there, how it is similar or different from what we have, and which parts of the code snippet or the example snippet we can integrate in our own layout. So in our layout, we already had like this container, so we won't copy that specific part. In our, we already had like this link that was the one corresponding to the image, so we won't copy the link. You know what I mean? But then, for instance, we want to add this home button. No, this one is not a good example, but then I will show you why. Because in this example, it has also some JavaScript. So that when it gets smaller, do you see that all of the links disappear, and instead of that, it shows this behavior? Okay, so that is done through JavaScript, and I prefer to show you that tomorrow, how to implement with JavaScript, or how to add those kind of behaviors with JavaScript. That is nothing different from importing a specific script on the bottom of the site to make it work. But for now, let's try to keep it more simple. Let me show you. Well, let's take, for instance, a look. Here I got out from the docs and I went here to examples, because in examples it has also like some specific examples like with more clear interfaces, not just a specific element, but examples of a specific parts of the website. So for instance, I have footers here, no? So I can take a look at these footers and let's try to think which one do I like the most. For instance, this one could be nice. How can I do in this case? What can I do? I can inspect the element. And let me see what happens if I try to copy paste directly it without doing anything. Okay, somehow it worked. Because it has, okay, the company. What is missing, what I'm missing here? The logos, no? Do you see that here it has like the links, but we can't see the image? Let me check if I can. Okay, let's say it doesn't work because we're missing the logos that we are going to place here. And they are getting these logos, or we should be getting these logos from something that I told you about Bootstrap also last time, and was the icons. So Bootstrap also has a huge set of icons that we can use in our website. So in this case, let me see just if it works. No, not yet. Ah, yeah, it added this icon here, okay? Okay, so tomorrow we will see in detail how to deal with the icons. We will work on other components of Bootstrap, and we will see how it behaves. Up to now, questions? Is everything clear? Perfect. So see you tomorrow.